Welcome to another conversation with Santa Cruz City Council candidates. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm here with J.M. Brown, who is running for City Council for the City of Santa Cruz. Welcome, J.M.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I've interviewed everybody else but you. I'm really glad you came in. I'm going to probably ask you some of the same questions I asked everyone else, but because of current events, we'll mix in some other ones.
Sure.
But I've been asking everyone, so I'll ask you just why did you get inspired to run, and what is it about your background you think will serve the city of Santa Cruz?
Well, as you know, I was a journalist for many years in this community, and when I left that profession last year, I was looking for an outlet for that sense of public service. And having covered the city council and the university and the public school system for many years, I had to do something with all of that knowledge about how the city works and how it works with other agencies and put it to good use. And so I realized I could take some of the same skills that I employed as a journalist, fact-finding, critical thinking, listening to all sides of a story, and put that to good use on the council.
You know, I come out of journalism as well, so I have a question about how you bridge that different role. As a journalist, I'm always asking the pesky questions, and it's not always appreciated in seats of power because it's not always politically expedient for them to answer those questions, as you may know. And there's a different role. You know, you're trying to speak truth to power, you're trying to get the real story out. Politics is a little bit of the art of compromise, and it's not always the art of having all cards always on the table, even though we think it should be as journalists. So how do you bridge that? How has it been for you watching from a different role as a candidate versus someone covering a race?
Yeah, it has certainly been, as a candidate, a much different experience. I have such a great appreciation now for how it was to be on the other side of my notepad, so to speak, and to be asked the really tough questions. And in large measure, I think the response that I've gotten from people in the community, whether it's at their doorstep or whether it's at an event, is that they're glad to have someone running for city council who's going to ask a lot of those pesky questions and insist on answers. I think, again, having the skill set of a journalist, someone who really wants to get to the heart of an issue and look at it from all possible sides is a plus in this race.
The difference, as I see it too, because I've also been involved with politics. You know, I was Bill Monning's district director and press secretary. So making that jump for me was thinking about how it would play with journalists as opposed to being the journalist. And that was a very different mindset for me. It was a gap between the action and the thought, which was very different.
Yeah.
So I hope if you do win, you find it a comfortable gap. But let's talk about some of the race, and I want to talk about the issues. There's so many, we won't get to them all in a half hour, obviously.
Yeah.
But if you had a top two that is bringing you in, besides the general idea of community service, which is great because it is a serving job, it's not going to make you rich.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that drew you specifically that you wanted to address?
So I have three things, actually, but I'm going to save the third one for later because I think we're going to talk about public safety. So I think our housing situation is, for me, the most critical, and we see this problem playing out throughout the county in terms of the availability and the affordability of housing. I believe that we need to gradually increase our housing stock, increase the diversity of our housing stock, so that folks from a wider range of socioeconomic backgrounds can afford to live here. I think the city's grown about 25% since 1990, and our housing stock has not kept up with that growth. So in my mind, we need to plan for the growth that's already here. And if we have people living in Santa Cruz who are having to commute from, working in Santa Cruz and commuting from long distances, then we need to create some additional housing because there's obviously a climate impact and a transportation transportation impact on that commuting. Secondly, and the thing that I'm most passionate about and have been most vocal about in terms of my advocacy on the campaign is the San Lorenzo River. We have this amazing public resource that is not being managed very holistically. I think that there are 6 or 7 city departments that have a role in managing the river, as well as state and federal regulators, private property owners, private business owners, and we need to have someone in the city, a city river coordinator, which position that used to exist but was done away with, that can sort of manage all of those different components. And what would we be managing to? Well, I think our river has the potential not only to be a safe and really active place, but there's economic development and housing and transportation and recreation aspects to that river corridor that have never been fully developed. And there's a vision that was articulated called the San Lorenzo Urban River Plan. It was adopted about 13 years ago by the council, and it needs to be worked on. It needs to be executed. And I really think that there's a lot of public consciousness about the river these days, and we just need to put the funding and the resources behind it.
Well, it certainly has sort of been ignored. All the buildings face away from it. A couple of the other people running for city council mentioned they were very against recreational use because they felt like it was already so impacted by garbage and other impacts on wildlife that what it really needed was some sort of conservation plan to bring back some of the wildlife that has been damaged by. And I know the city's not the only entity.
Right.
There's the Army Corps who built the levee. There's a lot of other things that come into a play, I guess, flood control among them.
Fish and wildlife.
Exactly. So there's a complicated nexus of different agencies, I imagine, that would have to be coordinated with something like that.
Yeah. One of the things, so I've been a member of the Coastal Watershed Council board for about 1.5 years, and that board has been advocating for determining whether it's right or not to paddle on the river. And there was one part of a bird impact study that was completed, and the second part of it, so that there was comparative data, was going to be done this year and is not going to be done this year, and I'm not sure if it'll be done in future years. That remains to be seen. What I've advocated for is that we need to have the information in order to determine whether it's right from an environmental perspective and a species perspective to do paddling. When I say recreation, I also mean the ability for people to bike and walk and run. I'm a runner, and I love running on the levee. And some folks have expressed over the past couple of months that they don't feel safe, or that there are people laying down on the levee. They have to stop their bike and move it around, and they don't want to hurt anyone, and they don't want to step over anyone, and that kind of thing. So it's balancing that sort of public space and the uses there, and I want to encourage as much recreation as possible on the Riverwalk.
It's a really interesting issue, and it's like when you're in an urban area, wild becomes a rather compromised word. It's not exactly that anymore.
Right.
I remember sleeping on the beach in Musselman and realizing I was in the middle of a giant city, and that was not a good idea. It was not a safe area, even though it was beautiful. So let's talk about some of these other issues. Let's talk about housing a little bit more, because it's always a tricky thing to just say you're going to build more, which is hard to argue against unless someone's in your neighborhood. And I know someone who just decided to move out of Santa Cruz, because actually was in Aptos, because low-income housing was going in across the street from their house, and they thought it was going to lower the value. And whatever my feelings about that are irrelevant because they're moving. So how do you do then, not in my backyard problem, when you are building lots of housing, which is mixed use, it's different income levels? How do you finesse that as a city council? What are the tools available to you if you are a city council person?
Well, I just want to stress again that I think not just increasing our housing stock, but really diversifying. So that means that we can build affordability within projects, and we can build them on a range of affordability. So we can build for very low income, but we can also build for median income or slightly above. That is considered a form of affordable housing. So I think when people hear the term affordable housing, they probably come to some conclusions about who might qualify for that housing. And I think they'd be surprised to learn that people, even with really good jobs, probably qualify for some amount of affordable housing.
Well, teachers, for example, people work at the hospital. I mean, we're talking about the average worker in Santa Cruz not being able to afford to live here anymore, and it becoming like San Francisco. So clearly something has to happen.
Yeah,
I wanted to get to one other issue because there's so many around this. That's Airbnb driving out the housing stock and turning it into nighttime, one at a time rentals. As nice as it is to rent your house out occasionally to some visitor coming from Europe and meeting them, I think we're talking about people who buy homes specifically to rent them one room at a time, one night at a time. And
that they don't live there on site at the time. Right.
So is there anything the city could do to regulate that?
Yeah, so the city is actually on Tuesday going to be considering a moratorium on vacation rentals while I guess it's the planning department goes through a robust process for what a sensible vacation rental ordinance will be like at some point. And I say sensible, I'm layering that word into the conversation because I think that there's a conversation to be had about the impact of vacation rentals of all types, whether they're single-family homes or whether they are accessory dwelling units, which are now, of course, not allowed to be used as vacation rentals due to council action last year. And I think what you see represented in that conversation is a balance that's needed between preserving housing stock for our community, but also balancing the private property rights of people who purchase property or people who already own property. And sometimes I've heard from folks that say, I have to rent out a room in my house, or I have to rent out my apartment for a weekend in order to afford my rent or to afford my mortgage. So we have to take into account that for some people, the ability to do that and have a high return on that stay, which also adds to our transient occupancy tax because people who have vacation rentals should be paying that tax. That's a whole other aspect that we have to balance with the need for housing in our community.
Yeah, I think I was referring more to the more egregious examples where someone will buy an entire apartment complex and turn it into Airbnb nightly rentals, which takes it out of regular housing people's range, you know.
Yeah, and the county has a model that's working well in that they created overlay districts. I believe it's in Seascape and Rio Del Mar, and now there's one up on the North Coast where a certain percentage of the properties on a block or a certain percentage of the properties in one neighborhood can be vacation rentals, and after that period, no other properties can apply. They get kind of maxed out. So that's kind of a model that's worked for the county. Another possibility that's being discussed here is to do like a 90-day limit. So that would encourage property owners to rent to students, basically, or even visiting faculty, I suppose, for most of the calendar year, and then open it up in the summer to vacation renters who primarily come in the summer anyway.
And that really fits the kinds of needs that are here, because often students will rent out their rooms for the whole year just to hold on to the room, and it becomes quite expensive for them. So on to another topic. This is more of a current event. We recently had a tragic shooting in our community where the police shot a mentally ill man who was wielding a rake. So far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, the mayor has not issued a statement or said anything about this. I was wondering how you would have handled something of this nature where it's not a matter of condemning the police action or judging it. That's its own process. But it's really the emotional impact on people who are dealing with family members who may be mentally ill, who now that this has happened may not call 911 now, that they're scared to reach out for help because they don't want to condemn their family member to death. They just want help dealing with a difficult situation. This is a hard one, and it's happening in other parts of the country. It happened in New York where a mentally ill woman was shot. This isn't getting as much attention as the Black Lives Matter movement has called to African Americans getting shot, but it's certainly a vulnerable population.
Absolutely.
maybe deserves a different response. And I don't know how you are thinking about this, but it must have come up in your conversations as you walk around.
Yes. So to your earlier point, I believe that the mayor and the police chief issued joint statements last week. I know I received them in my email, so I don't know how extensive they went, but I think there were comments issued by the two of them. But your question was about how I would have handled it on city council. I think communicating as quickly as you can with the community about an incident like that is important, because people are rightly concerned when any use of force happens. And I think having a communications background actually will be a benefit to the city if I'm elected, because I can sort of help navigate those difficult kind of situations in terms of communicating with the public. The thing that's come to mind most for me about this incident is just the deplorable lack of services for mentally ill people, or people who are experiencing even temporary mental illness. As we all know, the state defunded mental health services in large measure many years ago, and I think we continue to see the effects of that. And one thing that I've been advocating for is that when we think about our public safety challenges, that we really look at them as public health challenges in large measure, because in addition to untreated or undertreated mental illness, we have widespread heroin and methamphetamine use that's not being properly dealt with. And when you take those two things, especially when they're co-occurring, then you have a situation that's ripe for public safety challenges. And I think that, of course, we don't know all the particulars of this situation yet. There's a district attorney's investigation underway. But someone who's experiencing mental illness should never be put in a position where they're facing a situation with police officers. The right situation for them is clinician. It's social services. I'd like to see. We have one mental health outreach worker now who I believe actually goes with police officers on patrol. We need more of them, because that is such a huge problem in our community. And I'd like to see us work with the county to get more mental health resources with our police officers, because enforcement is not the way to work on that problem, and the police will be the first to tell us that.
Yeah, it's really a bigger systemic problem, but until we solve that, we do have an emergency, immediate need for non-lethal responses to tragic situations like was occurring. Often, and this is more of a general question, public safety being a big priority for you, often issues of substance abuse and homelessness get conflated in some political speeches about public safety. And you were saying it's a public health issue.
Yeah.
How do you take those apart and separate them completely? Because most of the crimes that are being committed are not being committed by homeless people. No. They are being committed by people who are either satisfying a drug habit or just career criminals. Maybe they're gang members. There's a lot of reasons people commit crimes.
Right.
And it seems like the only kind that are on the rise are property crimes.
Right. Which I would argue is fueled by the drug trade and drug addiction.
Yeah.
People stealing bikes, breaking into homes. I hear this so often while I'm out in the community. And in large measure, people really do understand that public health argument, and they say, absolutely, we get it. Yeah. And what can we do about it? How do we fund those public health fund solutions to those public health problems? Yeah. When it comes to homelessness, I think you're right. There is a conflation sometimes between homelessness and people who have an addiction or have a mental illness. And sometimes the addiction and the mental illness can contribute to the homelessness. But when it comes to homelessness, the thing that is so true for me is that housing is the end to homelessness. And if we can't get people either the emergency shelter they need and then the permanent supportive housing that they need, probably will not be able to make a measurable improvement in their lives in terms of treating their addiction and treating their mental illness. If you don't have a place to go, how can you possibly get the help you need?
That seems so true, and yet it seems I remember the city wasn't funding a wintertime shelter and that the churches were taking up that slack. Is there a way for people to get out of the cold at minimum in this town, just to kind of give them a place to be so they don't freeze and get sick and end up in the hospital or the jail to get warm. I mean, is there a way? It seems like the economy's on the upswing, so we ought to be able to find the money for basic things like a shelter over the winter. And then beyond that, of course, we need tiny homes. We need something longer term that actually works, that other cities are doing. But the basic, let's not let anyone freeze to death this winter kind of response, seems like we're still stuck in the 2008 recession in our minds, but the economy's improving, right? Shouldn't the city budget be able to find room for something as basic as that?
Yeah, well, the city still, through its community services budget, provides funding to the Homeless Services Center. I believe it's the Homeless Services Center that decided that the winter shelter was not going to be part of its suite of services this year. And I mean, of course, I'm not part of the city government system yet. but I would say as a council member that I would like to see us provide emergency housing in the winter. That is just a human basic right.
Most cities do that, I think.
Yeah, and I think we need to figure out a different model if the armory isn't working. There's a transportation issue with that site, because you really have to be willing to take a bus all the way up there and then you bus all the way in. And it's been my understanding that the armory hasn't been full oftentimes. And so there's a question to be asked about, well, is that really the most effective site? So I would certainly want to sit down with the Homeless Services Center Director, Phil Kramer, who I know is doing a good job and who I know that we're all happy to have here in our community, and find out what are some other possibilities. The fact that churches are willing on a rotating basis to take folks in and provide for them is really wonderful. I can't think of a more generous thing for a church to do than that.
Absolutely. I think they're just looking for some help.
Yeah.
Because they can't do it alone, and nobody can.
Right.
Some other issues I wanted to touch on, and those are trying to set up the conditions for better paying jobs so that people don't have to go over the hill. I know there's been a uptick in jobs in general, and they tend to be service jobs on the side of the hill. Are there any tools you think the city council can use in its arsenal of tools to improve the conditions or attract businesses that would provide better paying positions that were more in line with the university graduates we're getting coming out of UCSC? So
I think the biggest hurdle that we have as a community to creating higher paying jobs here is having the housing. I mean, I've talked to small business owners, even large business owners, and I just say, what are some of the impediments to opening a business here? And one of the biggest ones is always, well, where would we put our people? I mean, the housing market is already so tight, and there tends to be a trend now and a desire for people to live in walkable communities. So people want to have that experience where they walk to work or they bike to work. And we have the housing to accommodate that kind of lifestyle. And so that's the biggest thing, is that we're not going to get more employers to come here if they don't know for certain that there's housing available in the community for their employees. The other thing I would say is that I think as a city, we need to really think about how do we recruit businesses to come here and retain them with the current fee structure that we have, and how do we incentivize their desire to stay here? When what I've heard from many people is that it's very difficult to open and keep a business open here due to the various sort of fees and costs of running that business. So I think we need to take a look at that, because if it doesn't pencil out to come here, then people won't. And we need to encourage that, not only for creating higher paying jobs, but just for improving our tax base.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time together, so I wanted to give you a couple of minutes. We just have 2 minutes left to kind of wrap up some ideas with the audience about why you feel they ought to vote for you and how your candidacy differs from anyone else who might be running.
I think I've sat through more city council meetings.
God bless you, and you might sit through some more.
Than some council members, actually. And so the question I'm often asked, sort of tongue in cheek, but sometimes not, is, you've sat through all those meetings. You know what that experience is like. Why would you want to do that? And my response is, the meetings are important, and that's where the decisions are made. But the really good work of the council happens outside of that dynamic. It happens in working with your colleagues, working with the city staff, working with colleagues in the county government system, and most importantly, working with constituents and making sure that all voices are being heard and all voices are being considered. So I already have that frame, you know, that I approach everything with, having been in journalism for so long, that what I'm pledging to the people of Santa Cruz is to approach the work of the City Council through that same lens. And I do have a lot of good working information about the history of our town and about the politics involved in so many of these issues. And I really think that if you want an independent, critical thinking voice on City Council, I'm the one to vote for.
And I was just told we have a few more minutes than I thought, because that was a 2 and then there was a 4.
I would also say, since I have a few more minutes, that I'm a resident of the East Side. I'm a Seabright resident, and the East Side has, for many years, not had representation, or a lot of representation, I should say, on the City Council. And so I look forward to representing the East Side. I mean, we're not districted here, you know, we represent everybody, but you know, as I go to door on the East Side and people say, oh, you actually live here on this side of town, and I tell them exactly where I live, and they're really excited about the possibility of having someone from their neighborhood on City Council.
Yeah, so in our little bit of time, I'm curious if you feel like you've been adopted by another slate, or whether you're running as an individual, because it seems like this race has broken down into 4 and 4, and yeah. I know there is a brand new City Council 4 that have signed up to be together, but they're also individuals, and there's only, how many slots available, right?
4 out of 7.
Exactly. So would you say you're running on your own?
What I would say is that the 3 other candidates that I am, that other people are supporting alongside of me are candidates who are most aligned with my views. There was a slating dynamic that happened very early on in this race, and you just mentioned it. So I feel comfortable with the folks who other people have said, you know, well, if I'm supporting you, I'm going to support her and him. And I spent time with all of them, and I do feel our views are aligned, and I look forward to working with them on council.
Great. Well, J.M. Brown, I appreciate the time you spent today with us, and I wish you the best of luck, as I have wished every candidate, all 11 of you. And there will be 4 winners, give or take 0. Yes. There will be 4 winners in November. I encourage everyone to please get out and vote. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thank you for watching, and please go out and vote in November. We appreciate your time.